FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
I will gladly concede, because I think Mr. Hitchens is right on this, that there are some forms of religion that are pathological, that damage people. But there's a need, I think, for a real discussion about what is pathological and what is normal, about what is the center and what are the fringes. And that, I think, also extends to Mr. Hitchens' analysis of the impact of religion in general. He makes the point, and I think I want to say he is right to make this point, that religion has done much damage in history. I regard that point as being beyond contradiction, and it seems to me that every one of us here this afternoon needs to say that is right. But I think we need also to go further and begin to explore. And the kind of questions I would like to open up for discussion would include these. Yes, religion has done damage. But is this typical, or is this a fringe element? Who are the normal people? Who are the fanatics? And it seems to me there's a real need to try and make this kind of adjudication. I grant the history is there, that there have been some awful things done. But as Michael Shermer, who's president of the Skeptic Society, wrote in a book, How We Believe, some years ago, for every one of these atrocities, which must cause all of us deep concern, there are 10,000 unreported acts of kindness, generosity, and so forth arising from religious commitment. And trying to get this balance right seems to me to be of enormous importance. What is the fringe? What is the center? So that's one point I think I'd like to open up for further discussion. But I'd also like to try and just make a more general point, and that is that I think worldviews in general, whether they are religious, irreligious, whatever they are, have the capacity to animate people to the extent that they feel they must go and do things which many of us would regard as morally reprehensible. We see this in the Soviet Union, a rather grim period in modern history, where we find, for example, Lenin having said basically that there is no higher authority by which he may be judged, feeling able to, I quote, authorize the protracted use of brutality against religious believers. And it seems to me that we have here an ideology, a worldview, which basically is sanctioning violence, in this case, anti-religious violence. Now, I would not argue from that this shows that atheism in general, or atheists in particular, are violent people. It's much more about what movements do to people, about the damage that worldviews can cause when they begin to take over and begin to really animate people to want to do things. Again, look at the period under Stalin. There are many other examples we could give of worldviews that may well have begun with great excitement, great enthusiasm, a commitment to ideals that we can all identify with, but something happens and they go wrong. The French Revolution, I believe, began with an outburst of energy for liberty. But by 1793, it degenerated into the reign of terror in which an appeal to liberty sanctioned the most dreadful acts of violence. And many of you will know the tragic story of Madame Roland, who was brought to the guillotine on trumped-up charges in 1793. And as she was led to the guillotine, she pointed to a statue of liberty in the Place de la Révolution and said, "Liberty, what crimes are committed in your name?" History, I think, discloses a complex judgment here. I do not believe that it simply points to religion as being the cause of evil. I think it points to the capacity of all worldviews to begin to do this. It's not so much religion or indeed anti-religion. It seems to be something actually about human nature itself, which means that acts of kindness can be accompanied by acts of violence. There's something about us, I think, that really needs to be addressed there. So I don't think it's as straightforward as this. Religion poisons everything? I'm not sure. It can do, but so can other things as well. The real problem, I think, is extremism, the kinds of ideologies that force violence upon us. And those, it seems to me, do need to be challenged. And on that, I'm at one with Mr. Hitchens. But is it God that's doing this? Well, let's move on and talk about this. Clearly, a very important question here is how we know what God is like. Can you imagine God saying, go and do violence to someone? Well, I think some could quite easily. But I speak from a specific perspective, namely that of a Christian theologian. And for Christianity, the identity, the nature of God is disclosed in Jesus of Nazareth. He is the image of the invisible God. He is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And when we look at Jesus of Nazareth, we see something I think that is very, very challenging. We have one who refuses to do violence. Even in Gethsemane, when some want to raise swords to defend him as he's about to be betrayed, he bids them put their swords down. Jesus does not do violence, but he has violence done to him. And the point I want to make is that your vision of what God is like has a profound impact on what you think God is urging you to do. And it seems to me that if one is a good Christian, then one is going to take the vision of what God is like and what God wants us to do that we find disclosed in Jesus with the utmost seriousness. Now, let me make it absolutely clear. I concede, and I may well be one of these, that there are many bad Christians around who fail to live up to this vision. But I want to draw a clear distinction between some Christians are bad and Christianity is bad. There is an aspiration, an inspiration, a norm, and that means one can challenge those who want in some way to use violence in the name of God. And of course, you can see this impacting on the way in which people behave in an episode that happened a year ago here in the United States. You've had, unfortunately, in recent days, some shooting incidents. And of course, what I'm talking about is the Amish schoolhouse killings of October 2006. And many of you will know of these. Some of you may have been affected by them. A crazed gunman broke into an Amish schoolhouse and shot, I think it was 10 Amish schoolgirls, of whom 5 died. The Amish, as I'm sure you all know, are a very conservative Protestant sect who wear 17th century clothing, who won't drive cars, they use horse buggies, and they also regard the ethical example of Jesus as absolutely normative. For them, there will be no retribution of any kind. The cycle of violence was broken instantly because for them, Christ ordered them, commanded them to show forgiveness. That's a very important point. Religion, or at least in this case Christianity, contains within itself the capacity for self-criticism. This is not the way God is. This is not the way we should be behaving. And I fully concede there are those who fail to live up to that. But there is a challenge that can be issued to them. Why behave like this when there is the norm before you, authorized as what God would like us to do? So it seems to me there is a very important point to make there.